everybody, and welcome back to another book stream. Tonight we are on chapter 30 called When Elements Merge. In the last chapter, Merlin and Ion, his horsey, avoided getting killed by Valdirg, and they avoided getting killed by Valdirg long enough for Valdirg's one daughter to come and clear Merlin's name because he saved her in the past. So now let's read chapter 30, When Elements Merge. A high-pitched shriek pierced the sky. Like Valdirg, the hatchling and Ion and I looked up, and in that instant my blood froze. Not one Krelix, but many, at least a dozen, were plunging toward us out of the smoky clouds. Their mouths, gaping, showed their deadly fangs, and on the back of the leader rode the hunched figure of Bakod, his white hair streaming behind him. Bakod waved his arm to the Krelixes. Angling their bat-like wings, they immediately fanned out in a wide arc. With an ear-shattering series of screeches, they dived downward. Ion whinnied and snorted, stamping his hooves angrily. My sword rang bravely as I drew it from the scabbard, though I knew well its limits against Negatus Mysterium. In an instant, the Krelixes would be upon us. Suddenly, Valdirg's tail uncoiled and shot upward. The monstrous whip snapped as it struck one of the Krelixes. The beast screeched and fell lifeless from the sky. Like a raging swarm of hornets, the remaining Krelixes converged on the great dragon. Diving and swooping, they bore down on him, fangs bared, trying to get close enough to strike. Immense though he was, he moved with dazzling speed, spinning, rolling, and flashing his tail. Yet as long as he remained on the ground, the Krelixes would hold the advantage. At first I wondered why he didn't take to the air, where he could just be as mobile as they. Then I remembered. The baby dragon. He was protecting her. Deep in the folds of his wings she cowered, safe for the moment. But as long as he held her wrapped in one of his wings, he could not fly, and staying on the ground made him far more vulnerable. Ion paced, whinnying anxiously as we looked on. Though I brandished my sword and shouted at Bakod and the Krelixes, they ignored me. Nothing I did drew their attention away from the flailing dragon. Ion reared back, kicking at the air, then galloped in a circle around Valdirg. Still, the attackers paid no heed. Bakod didn't even look our way. All at once I understood. Since my dear magic had now vanished, they could sense that I possessed no power. Where I might have been at least a mild threat to them before, I was no threat to them at all now. The empty feeling in my chest ached like never before. The words from the prophecy of the dragon's eye echoed in my mind. Lo, nothing can stop him except for one foe descended from enemies fought long ago. A new realization gripped me. Perhaps the prophecy never meant me at all. Perhaps the dragon's ancient foe, the enemy that would either kill him or be killed in the process, was a Krelix. But if that was the case, what could the rest of the prophecy mean? Would all the Krelixes perish? Or just some of them? And what about the phrase, a power still higher? Something that could make elements suddenly merge, into air, water into fire. Roaring and spitting flames, Valdirg continued to hold off the attackers. His eyes, themselves practically aflame, seemed everywhere at once. The ground beneath us shook with the slamming of his tail. Dust and smoke climbed skyward. His one free wing batted constantly at the air above the wing, enfolding the cowering hatchling. In all his days of terror, I felt sure, never had he been more worthy of the name Wings of Fire. Now 3 burned Krelixes lay as smoldering heaps on the ground. The remains of 2 more, smashed by the tail, had been trampled in the fray. Still, 7 Krelixes, including the one bearing Bakod, remained. They swooped and hovered, always seeking a chance to bury their fangs someplace, any place, not shielded by scales. The most exposed target, I suddenly realized, was his wing. Curled tightly around his infant, the wing's leathery folds lay unprotected. Maybe, with the dragon's immense bulk, it would take more than one gash to destroy him. The thought gave me a spurt of hope. Then I bit my lip, remembering Cairprie's warning that even the smallest contact with the Krelix's fang could end the power, as well as the life, of any magical creature, no matter how large. At Bakod's command, the Krelixes climbed upward. So high they were nothing more than tiny black dots in the shreds of smoke. Barely, I could see them arrange themselves into a new formation, like the head of a spear. An instant later, they screeched in unison and soared straight at their enemy. Viscerally, I knew they were aiming for Valdir's wing, and only one of them needed to strike home. The baby dragon, sensing the same thing, whimpered and nestled deeper into the folds. As they shot toward Valdir, who seemed now less like a wrathful monarch than a protective parent, he released a defiant roar. Bracing for the assault, he swung his massive head toward me. For a fraction of a heartbeat, we gazed at each other. Yet even in that brief instant, I could not miss the look that I had never seen before in those glowing eyes. The look of fear. Twisting Ion's mane in my hands, I strained my mind to think of something, anything I could do to help. But what? In seconds, the Krelixes would reach their target. The baby dragon whimpered, shrinking farther into the wing. How, I wondered, had she revived? Was it possible that I had really given her something more potent than the herbs from my satchel? Without thinking, I reached inside the satchel. My finger pricked something sharp. The string from my psaltery. What had Cairpri once said it might bring? High magic, like nothing you have ever known before. I pulled out the string, warped and blackened by Arnaldo's fiery summons. Might it somehow call forth magic, even now? From hands without any magic of their own? I glanced at the sky. Wings folded against their backs, the Krelixes sped downward. Now I could see Bakod riding the leader, the point of the spearhead, and surrounding him, I could see 7 snarling mouths, 7 sets of fangs. In desperation, I plucked the string. It twanged, releasing a puff of soot, then fell silent. I heard no music. I felt no magic. Then, out of the very air around me, I heard a voice. It was Rhea, reminding me. Remember all the life around you, and all the life within yourself. Then, joining her, came the ancient grinding voice of the living stone. What is this strange magic within you, young man? How can you resist me? A stone's power springs from all that surrounds, all that connects. The hag Domnu cut in. My pet, she declared. I feel magic in you, even now. Finally, the resonant voice of Aramon called to me. You have power, Merlin. More power than you know. All the life within yourself. This strange magic within you. I feel it, even now. More power than you know. The Krelixes screeched, only an instant away. I looked up to see Bakod leering, his eyes fixed on Valdir's bulging wing that shielded his child. The great creature roared for the last time. The voice of Cairpri joined the others. Seek your answer within, my boy. Then came the many voices, blended into one, the Wheel of Way. Those powers are very near. A wrenching thought struck me. Perhaps I never lost my powers after all. Perhaps Arnalda merely tricked me into believing that. And yet, even if I still had magic, could I use it now? The Krelixes would just consume it, destroy it. Cairpri had said that magic, applied directly, was futile, that the best weapon was something indirect. What was his phrase? Something as ordinary, yet as powerful as air itself. Air itself. Even as Valdir's tail slashed out to strike as many Krelixes as it could, my mind raced through the many virtues of air, bearer of breath, of wind, of sounds and smells, of water. Water! Was there any way? The dragon's tail struck 2 of the Krelixes, sending them spinning, yet he had missed Bakod, now only a fraction of an instant away from striking. Valdir, unable to whip his tail again in time, was helpless. With all my strength, I willed the air surrounding the Krelixes to chill, to freeze. The psaltery string in my hand suddenly rang out, like a chime within my very chest. The old emptiness vanished, replaced by a surge of power that I knew to be my own. Concentrating all my thoughts on the air, I tried to draw away its heat. The air around Ion and me instantly shimmered with new warmth. I perspired, less from the heat than from the strain. At the very moment of contact, the air above Valdir transformed into a mass of ice, encasing Bakod and the rest of the Krelixes. They had no time to even shriek, although my head reeled from the scarlet explosion of Negatus Mysterium being released. The enormous block of ice fell squarely on the dragon's back, just below his folded wing. As the block of ice crashed into the charred terrain, Valdir bellowed in anger and pain. He released a torrent of flames, so hot that the frozen block erupted in a conflagration of hissing steam and sizzling bodies. Seconds later, all that remained of the incinerated attackers was a pool of water, blood, and fur, licked by tongues of sputtering flames. Ion neighed triumphantly. Casting his head about, he frisked and capered. For my part, I dismounted and moved closer to the steaming pool. My mind was filled with the vision of elements having suddenly merged, for air had indeed turned to water, water to fire. A high-pitched squeal arrested my thoughts. I started, for it sounded almost like a Krelix. In a flash, I realized that it was, instead, the baby dragon. She had emerged from the protective wing, her stubborn ear still protruding. Yet my stomach turned to see the expression of grief on her face, and again to see why. Valdirg, Emperor of the Dragons, lay still, his head resting heavily on his foreleg. No smoke curled from his nostrils, while his rumbling sounded thinner, frailer than before. Although his green and orange scales still gleamed in the light, they seemed somehow to have lost their luster. Yet most telling of all was the dimness of his eyes. While they continued to glow, their light seemed as fragile as the flickering flames at the edge of the steaming pool. Ion joined me as I stepped nearer. There, at the base of the wing that had shielded the hatchling, I saw a telltale trickle of blood flowing from a small puncture. While a wound of that size might not have normally been even noticed by a dragon, this wound had come from the fang of a Krelix. The hatchling, whimpering softly, stroked the spot with one of her floppy little wings. "He is dying," declared a familiar voice. Ion and I whirled around. There, facing us, stood a large-eyed doe. Her tan-colored fur was streaked with mud, while her legs bore several scratches and scrapes. Her mud-caked ears cocked toward me. "Halia," I whispered through the lump in my throat. I thought you were dead." "You underestimate me." She gave a slight snort, pretending to be insulted. "Deer know a few tricks of dodging pursuers, you know. Even Krelix's." Her deep brown eyes observed me. "You know a few tricks yourself, Merlin. I only arrived a moment ago, yet that was enough time to see what you accomplished." I winced, and did not accomplish. Turning back to Valdirg, I watched him gazing weakly at his offspring, now curled beside his belly. My powers have returned, but an instant too late. Solemnly I approached the dragon. Warm air flooded over me with each of his rasping breaths. His yellow eyes, now half closed, turned in my direction. "Grandson of Tuatha," the great creature rumbled. "I was wrong. You deserve to be called a wizard." My tongue, as dry as wood, worked in my mouth. He tried to lift his head, then slumped back. "Neither the Krelixes nor I survived this battle. At least I had the joy of roasting them in the end." His bulk shook with an anguished cough. "My child, though, what of her? Who will teach her to feed herself, to fly, to master her own magic? Who will show her how to find my hollow, our ancestral home? Who will help her to know the high destiny of a dragon?" Wishing I had my staff to lean against, I shifted uneasily before answering. "I know very little about dragons, and less about their magic, but I do know the way to your hollow, and my heart would be gladdened to guide her there." I glanced at Halia, who now stood on the blackened turf not far from the hatchling. Their eyes, one pair of circles of radiant brown and the other a pair of triangles of glowing orange, were fastened upon each other. Perhaps it was their shared magic or their shared experience of loss, but I felt certain that these two beings were communicating, speaking to each other in some silent language. "Your child will be cared for," I declared. The dragon's eyes glowed brighter, then faded rapidly. "Neither have I feared anything or anyone," he rasped, "until today. Yet what I feared during the battle was not an attack of Krelix's, but the death of my little one." Another cough racked his body down to the barbs of his tail, and now I find myself fearing something else. "What?" "Death! My own death. A dragon craves life, devours it, swallows it in great heaping mouthfuls. He is not slain easily and does not die tranquilly. He resists, he paused, trying to stifle a cough, to the last. His baleful eyes, now dull yellow, scanned me. Yet now I can resist no more. And now, young wizard, I am afraid. Slowly, I stepped closer to the immense face, my hand extended to touch the prominent brow above one eye. Without knowing where the words came from, I said, "Just look for the light, wings of fire. Walk there, fly there. Your child will be with you, and so will I." With that, Valdir heaved a final breath, releasing a final wisp of smoke. The light in his eyes extinguished, and they closed forever. Okay, so that is my chapter 30, and tomorrow we will read chapter 31, called A Power Still Higher. So thank you for joining me, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful night. Bye.